So you're probably going to use TypeScript with a JavaScript framework, and that's awesome because most popular JavaScript frameworks require zero configuration for enabling TypeScript support. But if you want to start a vanilla TypeScript project, I highly recommend you use Vite, which is the best option for you. So you can just say npm create Vite. Let me show you how simple it is. So if we go to the terminal, we can say npm create Vite, and we can say Vite latest, and then you're going to run through a simple wizard. So you can say OK to proceed. And you're just going to download Vite. You can give it the project name, blah, blah, whatever. And here is why Vite is so awesome. So Vite lets you create a vanilla project, Vue project, React, Preact, Lit, and even Svelte. You can go to vanilla and you can select vanilla TypeScript, and that's really it. And boom, you have a vanilla TypeScript project configured out of the box, and you don't have to worry about anything. So let me just exit out of this, and let me show you, for example, with a framework. So we can say npm, I think it's init Svelte. Yeah, let me just see, because I use pnpm usually. Yeah, and awesome. You can see this is really similar because Svelte is also based on Vite. So we can say yes to proceed. So we can say blank, and then it gives you this option if you say skeleton project or whatever, and then you have an option type check JavaScript, which SvelteKit has. So it's basically going to use JSDoc instead of TypeScript. You can just say TypeScript, right? And then it's going to ask you other questions, and boom, that's how simple it is. And that's the same experience you can expect from other frameworks. Even Next.js, I think for Next.js you have to specify a TypeScript flag and that's it, but you have to read the documentation, right? All right, so I'm going to exit this, but let's look at setting up TypeScript ourselves and the TypeScript compiler, right? Because so far we've been only using what's built into VS Code, which got us so far, and it's really awesome, right? But for example, let's say I'm here inside of an empty project, so nothing special here, right? And then we can initialize an empty project. If you say npm init and pass it a y flag, this is just going to skip the questions, so we don't have to answer them and waste time, right? And then we can say npm I install as a development dependencies TypeScript, and now we can use TSC, that stands for TypeScript compiler, to compile our code. Because at the end of the day, as I discussed, the browser or something like Node doesn't understand TypeScript, right? So as I said, TypeScript doesn't prevent you from runtime mistakes. So you have to compile your code, and that's what's run in the browser. So let me just create a file here. We're going to create a new file. I'm just going to call it app.ts, and then we're going to create const Pokemon. We can say string, and let's just name it Pikachu, right? And then, of course, if you have this, you have to bundle this somehow, right? This is what these tools like Vite, etc. abstract for you, so you don't have to think about it. So if I go to the console, we can use TSC now. And we're going to say npx tsc because in node modules, now that we install TypeScript, inside the bin folder we have tsc here, which is the TypeScript compiler, right? So you can say npx tsc, and then we can say app.ts. And this is going to compile our TypeScript code into JavaScript. So you can see here is app.js. And you can also specify, which we're going to look in a second, in the TypeScript configuration, you can transpile or compile this to whatever you want, ES5, ES6, etc., modern browsers, whatever you want, right? And this is how, at the end of the day, your code is shipped, and why TypeScript doesn't save you at runtime, because the browser or whatever else environment doesn't really understand what TypeScript is, right? So you can also pass it a v flag, which is going to be watch. So if you pass it v, it's going to be in watch mode, and then if you change, so I changed it to Charizard. I didn't save yet, so look at here, it's still Pikachu. So this should just update. Actually, I'm in the wrong one, my bad. Let's say that this is Charizard, so this is going to update here. Yeah, and then if I go back, I can say Pikachu. Yeah, and that's how that works. So this is really tedious, so you can add a script here. Let me just close this sidebar so it's more readable. And here I have an example. So we can say dev, and then we can say whatever we type right now. So npx tsc, app.ts, pass it a watch flag. Now you can press Ctrl+C to kill the terminal, and then you can say npm run dev, and you're going to get the same thing as you did before. So now, of course, once you have your handy dandy JavaScript file, let me just cancel this, so we're not bothered by this. I don't mean to do that. Yeah, let me just close that, close that. So of course you have your standard index.html file. We can use emmet inside VS Code, so if you press exclamation mark, it's going to autocomplete the tedious boilerplate. And yeah, we give it a title, for example, TypeScript. And here is where you just include your script and you're done. So you can include it here in the head if you want. So let's just say script, and then if we say source should be app, like this, app.js. And then we have to say defer, so it loads later. Otherwise you have to include scripts before your body ends, and this is just a new way when doing this if you want. And now you can include this code in your vanilla TypeScript project. But let's also talk about how to run TypeScript in your terminal. So for example, let me just close this file so it's not distracting. And I'm just going to clear the terminal. So for example, you might be used to running Node, and now you have an environment or REPL which you can execute JavaScript code in, but this really won't work for TypeScript because we can say, let Pokemon, for example, string Pikachu. This should give us an error because it really doesn't understand this. So we can also get a REPL for TypeScript using tsnode. So let me just exit out of this. You press Ctrl+C 2 times. But yeah, so let me just make this bigger. Yeah, and then we can say npx tsnode, and this is going to start a REPL. So we can see we're inside the REPL, so we can say let Pokemon, which is going to be a string. Let's just say this is Pikachu. And let's try assigning a number to Pokemon. We should get an error. And here it is. So that's how you can run a TypeScript REPL in the terminal. Let's look at some TypeScript compiler options. TypeScript looks for a tsconfig file by default, but we can create one by hand, or we can use the init flag with the TypeScript compiler. So inside your terminal, you can run npx tsc init. And let me just open the sidebar so you can see. You can see a tsconfig file is going to be generated with some default config. And then let me just collapse everything, and then we can open it. Let me just close the terminal and the sidebar so it's easier to read. And you can see here are a ton of options, and you even have descriptions on the right hand side, which you can read if you want forever, or you can consult the TypeScript documentation. But yeah, here are some interesting things like target, module, common.js, so your output target, right? And then there's some other things, yes, module interop. Strict, we also use strict in the past, and this is what's going to be turned on by default in most projects, and you should have this on by default. So, right, it doesn't make sense if you just use TypeScript and then type anywhere, right? And not those other things. But yeah, it really isn't a lot here, but we can just describe some of these options. We can, for example, I have an example here. I'm going to copy over, and I'm just going to copy that over. So this is like the most basic config for the TypeScript compiler options, and we can see that TypeScript is mad about something because we changed it. So remember, as I said before, if you have some weird issue, let's just say TypeScript, and then you can restart the TypeScript server. I got here by pressing Ctrl+P command palette, and then you type the pointy boy so you get into command mode, and then you can restart TypeScript server. And if it doesn't fix it, then sometimes you have to restart the editor. There is no helping you. So yeah, basically this is simple. So this is the target ES5. The ES5 version of JavaScript, right? And here I have some explanations of this. So target specifies the target JavaScript version the TypeScript code compiles to, but you can use, for example, ESNext if you want to support all the modern browsers. You can say ESNext. So the module specifies the module system we're going to transpile to, where CommonJS, for example, uses the require import syntax, and ESX in onwards uses ECMAScript modules, which is the import package from package syntax, and is supported natively in browsers as of recent. So the lib part decides what types to include with our code, because we might not need DOM types, for example, or we want to target some other JavaScript features. And then, of course, self-explanatory, the output directory is this, and then we can specify if we want to change the location of our code, for example, to be in the source directory. And for example, no omit on error doesn't output anything if there's a TypeScript error. So if there's a TypeScript error, it just won't build anything, right? And then strict, of course, is the most important one. It enables all the strict flags so our code is more type safe. And I also mentioned here that since we set the root directory, we don't have to specify what file we have to watch. So inside your package.json, we can remove this part and everything should be fine because TypeScript now can use the config. Alright, so that was pretty much it. Catch you in the next one.